Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 130 chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it's making a noise. I told him what I thought the noise was, and he asked me to confirm it. Take a listen and see if you know what it is.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Pretty noisy. Let me know down in the comments if you know what this problem is or just want to guess. So we're going to systematically rule things out until we get to the end of the video where I reveal the problem. First thing we're looking at is the clutch, chain brake, this whole area. Drum spins okay. That bearing didn't seem dry or noisy. Maybe a little dry, but didn't seem very noisy. So I just went out and blew that off a little bit. Cleaned it up. That looks a little better. So let's take this clutch off and get a closer look at that bearing. And maybe even run it with the clutch and drum off of there and see what it sounds like. We got our official clutch removal tool. Clutches are spun reverse threads, so we banged it off of there. Here's our drum with the bearing in it. Bearing looks fine. See what it sounds like. Sounded the same, just didn't have a clutch and a bar and a chain on it. Alright, well, it wasn't the clutch. Let's take a look under the hood. On a 130, we just have these two screws that hold the hood down. The saw is in really nice shape. I was just shaking it there to see if there was anything loose in the muffler, and I didn't hear anything. You know, sometimes you get a baffle that breaks loose and rattles around inside there, and it can make a pretty awful noise. It's a pretty awful looking spark plug, by the way. Quick look inside the cylinder. It's clean and shiny. So if a scored cylinder could make any noise, it's not the case here. The fuel seems okay. Let's dump it out and take a closer look at it. Fuel doesn't make noise, but bad fuel could cause, dry bearings or something like that. Certainly looks like there's enough oil in that fuel. And I don't see any water rushing around down in the bottom of the tank or in the bottom of my funnel. We'll just clean up some of the schmutz here. Alright. What are we going to look at next? We're going to pull the starter off. You know, we could have a problem with the starter, the clutch dogs, the starter pawls. Maybe the ignition coil hitting the flywheel or something stuck to the flywheel magnet dragging around in there, rattling. I mean, the starter looks pretty good. The air conductor isn't busted up and rattling. Starter pawls are on the flywheel. Ignition coil is tight. Something sounds a little noisy on the as far as the bearings go. I don't feel any play, so I don't know if a bearing is out. But I think we're going to do something a little sketchy here, just to rule out anything with the starter. And I don't recommend doing this, so, you know, just watch the video and think, what a knucklehead for doing that. Don't try it at home. So put some fuel back in here. We're going to start this thing up and remove the starter while it's running, just to confirm that there's nothing going on here. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but yeah, sketchy. Nothing can go wrong here. Alright, for anyone that thought maybe there was a problem, noise coming from the starter somehow, it's not. So what does that leave? Not a whole lot, really. We're going to dump the fuel back out of here, because we're going to start tearing it apart. So if nothing else, this video will be a, I don't know about tutorial, but it'll show how to access the crankshaft of a Husqvarna 130. Alright, our tank is empty. The tank's going to have to come off of there. Blow some schmutz out of there. We need a box for parts. Happen to be one here sitting by the door. Just about the right size to fit that whole darn saw in there, right? Which is what I'm guessing a lot of you are thinking, that it's just a 130. Might as well throw the whole saw in the junk. It looks pretty good, but this one's actually out of warranty. We got a pair of nuts holding the airbox on. These are 8mm. We'll get these turned off of here. And then we got a couple of screws that run through the airbox into the secondary throttle assembly. So the airbox is technically loose, but there are these two rubber saddles that the airbox is pinned into. We got to sneak the primer bulb out of that hole that it lives in. And then we got to get these lines and everything off of here. And the easiest way in this model is just to pop that primer bulb out of the holder. So we can get at the lines, get the airbox out of the way. We'll just pop these two kill switch wires off of here. There we go. All right. Cleaning things up a little bit before I pull the carburetor off here. Here's our secondary throttle assembly. Kind of hanging from the linkage right now. There it goes. So on this side of the saw, we're going to have a throttle cable. We're just lifting that ferrule of the cable out of the cam on the side of the carburetor that it pulls on. And then we're going to have a fuel line here. Going to pop it off the carburetor. I got like 3 different specialty tools for removing fuel lines sitting right there in arm's reach on the bench, but I guess that little screwdriver was closer, huh? Alright, let's pop this fuel line off of here. We have harvested a carburetor. I gotta clean this up a little bit, get some of that raw fuel out of my way. Alright, on the handle, the 130 is a little unique. Most Husky handles on the bottom side have a couple of screws that hold it to the fuel tank. On this one, you got a screw that runs through the chain catch. Right here. We remove the chain catch and then we run through that hole and we can remove this screw that runs through the anti-vibe spring. It not only goes through the anti-vibe spring, but all the way through the tank and into that handle. So there we go. Alright, now to finish removing the tank, there's another anti-vibe spring on this side. And then it's just a matter of pulling the throttle cable and one fuel line through the bottom of the carb tray there. The cable's just kind of hooked up in its holder. Once I pop it out of there, then this all falls apart. Throw the fuel tank in our parts box. Alright, we're getting closer. This handle's kind of annoying. I'm going to get that out of my way before I break it. 2 screws, and you can remove the handle. Once you remove the handle, you need to get the spring and detent off the chassis before it falls off when you're not paying attention. More schmutz. So on most saws, this black piece would be a worm gear. I kind of forgot that on this saw, that's just a seal. So there's one screw that holds that chain guide plate into place. And you'll see when I pull it off of there that that black rubber piece is just like a dust shield. Yeah. And then you can see that the pump, the orange piece, and the pinion on the end of the crankshaft are matched together there. And there is, because of that design, if the engine's running, the oil pump is working. Kind of low budget, but it's a low budget saw. I think these sell new for about $250. So we dumped the oil out of the tank. And now we want to pull the flywheel off here. I'm just going to back the flywheel nut till the nut is flush with the end of the crank. It gives me a nice surface to aim for with the hammer. I'm going to get a crowfoot bar behind the flywheel just to put a little pressure on it. One wrap, break it loose. And then we can pull the flywheel off of here. So this is a clamshell design engine. We're trying to get the engine out of the plastic chassis. Here's a kill switch wire that's got to be removed. It's part of the ignition coil, so I couldn't leave it in the chassis. More schmutz. This is like a 4 schmutz kind of video. Alright. Keeping things clean as we move along. It's time to separate the chassis from the engine. So these bolts, they're like T27, but they also have a 8mm nut shape to them, so I can break them loose. And then I'll just put the driver on there and buzz them out. Now on this particular saw, once these bolts are out, you can't separate the engine from the chassis. There's one more screw that's got to come out. And you'll see that in a minute here. This isn't going to just fall apart, because the way it's designed, I have to take this one screw out of here, and it runs up through the bottom cover of the engine. You'll see that in a minute. Okay, now that I have that screw out of there, we can separate the chassis and the cap on the bottom of the engine and have access to the crankshaft. And so far everything looks normal. We can pull that crankshaft out of there. I mean, there's no visible damage to any of the bearings. The upper rod bearing may be a little sloppy. Some evidence on the piston of maybe old fuel. A little noisy. That's noisy. You'll notice that the end of that crank is dark, like it got hot. So there's your problem right there. Did you catch that when I first ran it? This bearing's okay. So that's all I have for you on the Husqvarna 130 chainsaw that was making a noise because it had a bad crank bearing. Thanks for watching. Later.